The revolution of 1911 actually accomplished two important things. One is that it brought about the end of Manchu rule, about 250 years of Manchu rule from 1644 onwards. And the second is that it was in 1911 that there was a formation of the Republican form of government in China. This revolution is also known as a bourgeois democratic revolution in the sense that it was led by the Chinese national bourgeoisie. And this revolution was the product of a series of movements, popular movements of different types, which culminated in an anti-imperialist and anti-Manchu movement. But since it was led by the national bourgeoisie, and since this bourgeois class was very weak, both economically as also politically, so it had relations of two types with the foreigners and the feudal elements. On the one hand, it had developed contradictions with both of them, and on the other hand, it had also a proneness to compromise with them. It was because of these diametrically opposite standpoints that the revolution ultimately proved to be a failure, and it remained an incomplete revolution. Now we know that after the signing of the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, a number of humiliating treaties were signed. And it was these humiliating treaties which foreign powers forced the Chinese government to sign. All these transformed China from a feudal country into a feudal and semi-colonial country. It would not have been possible for the foreign powers to transform Chinese society on their own unless they had accomplices within the country itself. And they had willing accomplices in the Manchu ruling clique, among the feudal elements, among the militarists, among the bourgeoisie, comprador bourgeoisie, which was developing at that time because of the industrialization, because of the coming of industrial capitalism in China, which of course was a transplantation from the Western countries. Chinese industrial capitalism was not the product of the indigenous evolution of Chinese society. As a result of this, China was actually split up into different spheres of influence. It was, Western scholars say that China was like a watermelon, which was to be sliced up among various foreign powers, one region for one foreign power, another for the other one. So it was in this way that whole of China came to be divided into spheres of influence. As a matter of fact, the foreign powers forced China to open as many as 82 of our inland and coastal ports to their trade, and 16 areas were marked off as their concessions, that is, as their own areas, foreign territories, foreign enclaves, that is, foreign enclaves within the Chinese mainland. They invested in China, invested in various industrial undertakings, etc. And the total amount mounted to something like 200 million silver dollars, 200 million Spanish silver dollars, carolas, that was the name. They also gained access to 80 to 10% of China's heavy industry. They also control communication network, whole transport. They also extracted from different treaties some concessions which enabled them to exercise control over the customs, over the inland tariff duties, etc. So it was in this way that the whole Chinese economy, in some way or other, came under the control of different foreign powers, not just Britain, but many other foreign powers. In the last occasion, in the last episode, we have talked about the foreign missionaries. Foreign missionaries actually denationalized the Chinese people. The Christian missionaries came. There were innumerable cases of the kidnapping of Chinese children, and they were forced into Christianity. They were forced to adopt Christianity. And not just the children, but aged people also, young men, aged people. They also got themselves converted into Christianity. And as a result of this, the whole there was something like a denationalization of the spirit of the body. That took place in China, which definitely hurt the Chinese thinking detrimentally to a very large extent. And it was all these factors which exacerbated the social contradictions within China and led to a series of movements, peasant rebellions, popular outbursts of one type or another, which ultimately put an end to Manchu rule, and a republican form of government was set up. The revolution of 1911 can be divided into three stages. First stage, 1894 to 1904. Second stage, 1905 to 1908. Third stage, 1909 to 1911. Throughout these three stages, different social forces played their role. The new gentry, Western educated intellectuals, reformists, the later Qing reforms, constitutionalists, secret societies, toiling people, overseas Chinese students, and above all, the revolutionaries who assembled under the leadership of Sun Yat-sen. The 1890s were a period where reformist ideology had been gaining ground, particularly among the Western educated intellectuals and commercial people who had been residing at that time in the partially westernized port cities. They were influenced by reformist ideology, by modern ideas. We can also refer in this connection to the War of 1884-85 with France, which again ended in the defeat of China and signing of another humiliating treaty. At that time, Sun Yat-sen, along with his associates, they had been very busy preparing proposals for reform, which they presented before the powers that be at the Manchu ruling court. But those proposals failed to get any response from the government, from the Manchu government. And so Sun Yat-sen and his associates became frustrated. But it had also its silver lining, because Sun Yat-sen now realized that they would have to think about something else, and that what China needed at that point of time was a revolutionary overthrow of the existing society, particularly the Manchu rule, and that a republican form of government should be set up. Now, with that end in view, Sun Yat-sen set up his first society, Revive China Society, or Sing Chung Hui, in 1894 in Honolulu. Anti-Manchu popular outbreaks spread from one area to another, and Sun Yat-sen planned an insurrection in Canton, in the city of Canton, and in Hong Kong. It was Chien Hen Company. It was a commercial firm, no doubt, but actually it was operating on behalf of the revolutionaries. It acted as a legal cover of the Hong Kong branch of Sing Chung Hui, or Revive China Society. It served as a headquarters of the uprising in Canton. In fact, if one goes to Hong Kong, recently I had been to Hong Kong, and there are two restaurants which are there, where actually Sun Yat-sen met with his associates to plan his uprisings. The restaurants are there in the same manner. So it's a historical place, no doubt. Anyway, now Sun Yat-sen had been busy secretly to propagate his ideas about revolution, about the formation of a republican form of government among government officials, students, youth, secret societies, among Qing army, particularly those who were in Japan also. When he went to Japan, we'll deal with Sun Yat-sen later in another episode, not this episode anyway. And there was another group, a secret society group known as a Greenwood group. It was a group of armed rebel peasants near the city of Canton. Now, it was these forces which formed the social basis of Sun Yat-sen's revolutionary activity. In fact, there is a description of how Sun Yat-sen planned the uprising in Canton in a book by H.Z. Shifrin. But actually the plot was exposed, and Sun Yat-sen became a fugitive in China. He was declared an outlaw, and he had to leave mainland China, and he first went to England, London, and from there he traveled to other parts of Europe. In the meantime, a war with Japan took place, 1894-95, and it ended in the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. China, as always, had been defeated this time also, and this proved that the program of westernization, or the motto of learning from foreigners, were totally futile. Then, closely following this, there was the reform movement of 1898, and the failure of that movement also made people come to the conclusion that such movements would in no way bring about a permanent solution to the ills China had been suffering from. Now, meanwhile, one important development took place, and that development took place in Japan. Now, before July 1899, Western powers, not just Western powers, other powers, including China, enjoyed the right of extraterritoriality in Japan. It means that if a Chinese rebel was caught in Japan, then he would be arrested by the Japanese police and then handed over to the Chinese government so that they would be shifted to mainland China. So it was this right, this privilege, which enabled the Manchu government to gain the support, active support of the Japanese police, Japanese government, to catch hold of Chinese rebels, anti-Manchu dissidents who had been there in large numbers in Japan at that time. But after July 1899, it was no longer there. It was totally done away with. Now, this placed the Manchu rulers at a disadvantage, because henceforth Manchu rulers could not expect to get the support of the Japanese government to arrest rebel Chinese. But on the other hand, the dissident Chinese students and youth, many of them were there, they now could move around freely and propagate their ideology openly without moving in a clandestine manner. So it was an advantage for the Chinese dissidents, and it was a disadvantage for the Manchu government. Now, meanwhile, events in China had been moving towards a national crisis. That was also a period when foreign aggressiveness was receiving no check. There was absolutely no check on foreign intrusion, foreign penetration. Railway concessions, mining concessions had been lavishly given. Russia was there, Germany was there, Belgium was there. All of them had their railway projects in their hands, in their pockets. And it was these developments which naturally disturbed Chinese life to a large extent. Because once you construct the railways, the railway lines are constructed from one part of the country to another, through different regions, through different provinces. It also helped in the development of provincialism, because provincial spirit was affected because of the construction of railway lines, which are owned by the foreigners, under foreign control. And in fact, the condition was very much ripe for a revolutionary uprising. And we know that the Boxers raised the slogan of exterminate the foreigners. It was one of their main slogans. So the situation was very ripe during that period. Now, we have referred to the Sing Chung Hui, that is the Revived China Society, now, which was formed by Sun Yat-sen himself. But apart from Sing Chung Hui, there were at least two other societies which played positive roles in the revolutionary movement. One was Huang Fu Hui, or Society for the Restoration of China, and the other was Hua Sing Hui, Society for the Revival of Chinese Nation. It was these three revolutionary organizations which came to an agreement on some basic points, that is their anti-Manchu stand, that Manchu rule should come to an end, and that foreign control should also come to an end. Now, regarding foreign control, they were not very vocal, but the idea was there. Sun Yat-sen also not very vocal at that time against foreigners, but idea was there. Why this was so, we'll discuss either today or in the next episode. Anyway, but all of them agreed on this particular point, that there should be the end of Manchu rule, and unless there is a revolutionary uprising, one cannot bring that about. There were secret societies also very active at that time. There was another slogan which was raised, that overthrow the Qing and restore the Ming. Qing, that is the Manchu, restored the Ming dynasty, which was a Chinese dynasty, which is overthrown by the Manchus or the Qings. So there were many followers of the Ming dynasty who raised the slogan of overthrow the Qing and restore the Ming. And all of them combined, they extended their active support to all these revolutionary efforts. To bring about revolution, what was absolutely essential was to propagate their ideology. And for propaganda purpose, one needs to come out with periodicals. There should be broadsheets, there should be periodicals, publications of different types. In fact, revolutionary ideology was disseminated through publications of different types. There were 3 different types of publications. One was the reprinting of books exposing the torture committed by the Qing nobility ever since they captured political power in 1644 by overthrowing the Ming. The second was the publication of essays and books written by bourgeois revolutionary intellectuals to expose the corrupt practices of the Manchus, their subservience to the foreign powers, and their selling out of the country to the foreign powers. Because unless they had willing accomplices among the Manchus, among the Manchu rulers, it would not have been possible for the foreign powers to plunder the wealth of China. And the third was the compilation and translation of books of Western origin, books which are written in the capitalist West during their stages of bourgeois revolution, so that those could be pointed out in support of their movement. So they were looking not only towards their own heritage, but they were also looking towards the West to strengthen their own movement directed against that enemy, those enemies against materials coming from the capitalist West. Those same materials were to be used against that capitalist West. So these were the publications of 3 different types. Now there were some intellectuals who could make the deepest impression on the public mind through their writings. And one of them, of course, was Chen Tianhua. Second is Zhou Jung, and the third was Chiang Tai-yen. Now, Chen Tianhua, he wrote 2 important pamphlets. One is the Alarm Bell, and the other is the Awakening. In those writings, he hailed the greatness of the Chinese nation. He also assailed the villainy, the treachery, the betrayal committed by the Qing rulers against the Chinese people. His demands included the expulsion of the foreign invaders and the destruction of the native traitors and the collaborators who served them, and also to serve revolutionary aims. He also talked about the revision of the old treaties, all old treaties, unequal treaties, humiliating treaties which China was forced to sign, and the recovery of the all lost sovereign rights. So it was very much revolutionary, there is no doubt about it. Both anti-Manchu and anti-foreign, no doubt about it. The second crusader was Zhou Jung. He wrote a pamphlet entitled The Revolutionary Army. He also expressed more or less the same ideas in bold, simple words, and his ideas comprised of the overthrow of the Manchu state, struggle against foreign aggression, equality for the people, and the establishment of a republican form of government. Like all repressive regimes, the Manchu government also resorted to state terror. It resorted to various repressive measures after being faced with such political and ideological attacks. one periodical, Kiangsi News, was banned. Kiangsi News was banned, and then the revolutionary forces came out with another magazine, Citizens Daily. As more and more periodicals faced wrath of the Manchu rulers, then people came out with more and more magazines, one after the other. All those literature, of course, they were banned, proscribed literature. I can refer to one example, Sao A Kuo. And in fact, he was so much influenced by the ideology that he got a copy of The Awakening, which was banned earlier. And whenever he went, he made public speeches championing revolutionary movements. He was arrested and executed by the Manchu rulers. But despite these repressive measures, the people of China refused to be cowed down, refused to be browbeaten. Whenever books were not available, periodicals were not available in the countryside, they went to Shanghai, they went to the cities, and from there they procured the books. And they got copies and took them to their own villages to make propaganda. As a matter of fact, there is a statement by Mao, where there is oppression, there is resistance. This statement was made by Mao Zedong in a later period when he was leading the Chinese Revolution. But when he made this statement, he had already summed up the experience, the past experience of China, of the Chinese people, the movements of the Chinese people. Repression was not the only method adopted by the Qing rulers. They also felt that some reforms had to be given in order to consolidate their position, because they realized that they were facing their end. Their rule would come to an end unless some reforms were initiated. And that ultimately led to the later Qing reforms of 1901 and 8. And these reforms were undertaken to protect their own regime from impending doom.
Sir, my question is, you said the movement was a culmination of a series of movements from top and the bottom. So I want to ask that whether there were any contradictions between these movements from the top and movements from the bottom.
Yes, movements which arose from the bottom had programs which were not exactly similar. There were some similarities, no doubt, but not exactly similar to the issues raised from the top. Now, as for example, when common people, the peasants, artisans, they had been suffering both from feudal oppression as also from imperialist penetration. So, and it was very difficult for them to make both ends meet. So they could identify their enemies better than those people at the top. So they were more vocal against both, because it was very clear. The role of the missionaries was clear. The Manchu rulers, feudal rulers, their role was very clear. So this anti-imperialist and anti-feudal aspect or anti-Manchu aspect, these two aspects were more or less clear among people who had been staying at the bottom. But people who had been demanding reforms, that is people from above who championed the reformist ideas, they were basically in favor of Western learning, modernization of the country along Western lines, etc., for the development of industries, etc. So their ideas were not exactly similar. So there was a contradiction between the two, between the one and the other.
So my question to you is that what is the basic difference between the comprador bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie, if there's any difference at all?
Comprador bourgeoisie is a bourgeoisie which shows proneness to compromise with imperialism, with foreign powers. It is pro-imperialist. Comprador bourgeoisie had its interests intertwined with the interest of the foreign bourgeoisie. It also acts as agents of foreigners. Yan Pinghao, the Chinese historian, has described it as the bridge between the East and the West. And the national bourgeoisie is that section of the bourgeoisie which in one sense it is anti-imperialist because it wants to adopt a policy of self-reliance. It wants to have a full-blooded capitalist development, but since it is very weak, it cannot develop. But it has the eagerness. As a matter of fact, it is in a dependent country, semi-colony or colony, that one can have bourgeoisie of these two types. You cannot have a competitor bourgeois in England. You can have a competitor bourgeois in India, because it was in independent countries, in colonies or semi-colonies, that where imperialist control is there in some way or other, it was in such a situation that you can have the bourgeoisie split up into two sections, the competitor and the